Tonight, the Prime Minister risks a further breach with Donald Trump as the President's plan to blockade Iranian ports comes into force. Sir Keir Starmer tells the Commons the UK will not support the US operation and criticises Donald Trump's language as research shows the war could trigger an economic cost to households of hundreds of pounds this year. The US President also hits out at Pope Leo for opposing the Iran war, but removes this AI-generated picture he posted of himself striking a messianic pose. Also tonight, controversy over government plans to sign up to EU single market rules. Are the old Brexit battles set to resume? And best friends, once again, Starmer, Rayner and Burnham join forces at a school called the Holy Trinity, a breakout of party harmony or a premonition of a future leadership battle. Harmony will, of course, reign here in the studio with our duo Baroness Saida Varsi and John McDonnell will be with me for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Ali Fortescue live from Westminster and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Politics Hub. Well, the Easter recess is over. The Prime Minister is back in Westminster, but his time once again is being taken up by the war in Iran and how to navigate an unpredictable US president. Tonight, we've had perhaps Keir Starmer's most direct attack yet against Donald Trump. He says the president was wrong, as he puts it, to threaten to end a civilization. He's also insisted that the UK won't be part of the US's blockade of Iranian ports and criticised Israel's military campaign in Lebanon. Have a listen.
Whilst the ceasefire between the US, Israel and Iran is undeniably welcome, it is also highly fragile. The region remains on edge and a lot of work is required to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to de-escalate the situation, leading to a sustainable ceasefire. In pursuit of that goal, we call for Lebanon to be included urgently in the ceasefire. Diplomacy is the right path, and I welcome the talks taking place this week. Hezbollah must disarm, but I'm equally clear Israel's strikes are wrong. They are having devastating humanitarian consequences and pushing Lebanon into a crisis. The bombing should stop now.
Let's go straight to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who joins us now, and you were watching this. I mean, do you get the sense that Keir Starmer thinks he's in a good place on Iran?
First and foremost, the Prime Minister was delivering an update on the first day back of Parliament after the Easter recess, when there's been a lot of events. So on one level, Downing Street would discourage you from over-strategising. But to be honest, Ali, you can see all sorts of threads of things that help the Prime Minister's political strategy. His team think that his response to what's been going on in Iran has been one of the most successful recent periods of his premiership. And at every turn, there was an attempt today to double down on that. And he did say, you know, very clearly that the strikes are wrong, that there are Israel's continued bombing of Lebanon is having a particularly deleterious consequence, that the ceasefire needs to endure. It's very fragile, but also emphasising that Britain stayed out of the war and admitted that there were negative economic shocks to come out of it, but wanted to make clear that it was Donald Trump, whose comments about civilization he distanced himself for, to blame for all of that. There's an even bigger picture. He's knitting out a strategy, a wider strategy of bolstering the economy and closer ties with the EU and clean energy as the things that need to change in Britain. He is turning it into a political moment of his own choosing. Here we are 3 weeks before a set of local elections.
But I guess the thing is, there is economic pain, not right now, but it is definitely coming, and that is going to have an impact. So, you know, is he wise to be talking like this?
So what's really interesting is that in his statement, Keir Starmer was absolutely upfront that pain is coming. But we've got, frankly, a bit of a mismatch between the time when the pain hits and this moment now where we're all watching it unfold, because Straits of Hormuz that is not unblocked does not affect us today, but it sure will do by the end of the year. And just how bad it's going to get was spelled out today by the Resolution Foundation. They're talking, Ali, about food inflation of 10% by the end of the year. Energy bills of going from 1,600, roughly where the cap is at the moment, to maybe even above 2,000. And the 1.5 million people who are on fixed-term mortgages this year and next year, 2-year fix, 5-year mix. You know, for those on 5-year fix, going from a 1.6% rate to a 5.3% rate, that's an enormous jump in monthly payments. By the end of this year, we're not going to be talking about the Prime Minister's decision-making at this point. We're going to be talking about yet another decline in millions of people's living standards. And I think that whilst there is opportunity now, I think the political pain from the cost later will be very real at the same time.
Yeah, OK, so more on this to come. Thanks so much, Sam Coates, for your analysis tonight. Well, in the last hour or so, Donald Trump has spoken at the White House about his blockade plan. Let's have a listen.
We can't let a country blackmail or extort the world, because that's what they're doing. They're really blackmailing the world. We're not going to let that happen.
Well, our business and economics correspondent, Paul Kelso, reports now on how that blockade might pan out.
As of 3 p.m. UK time today, there are not one but two blockades of the Strait of Hormuz. One courtesy of Iran, whose threats against shipping have effectively closed the Gulf for 6 weeks, and now a US blockade, threatened at the weekend by Donald Trump and now clarified by US Central Command, which has said in a message to all shipping, any vessel entering or departing the blockaded area without authorization is subject to interception, diversion and capture. Now, it says this covers all Iranian ports, but not neutral vessels. In short, anybody doing business with Iran will be subject to US action, but those that don't won't. Now, it appears to be an attempt to neutralise the Iranian charging of tolls to vessels to secure safe passage and to prevent Iran exporting the oil on which it relies economically. Key question is, what will it do to traffic in the Strait of Hormuz? Well, this video shows us traffic in the 24 hours running up to today's deadline. You can see scores of tankers and cargo ships at anchor on either side of the strait. But if I speed this up a bit, you see actually very little movement through the narrowest part of the strait itself. Some individual vessels are moving, but very, very few. And compared to the historic volume started this year, this is oil and liquefied natural gas tankers, 50 to 60 a day before the Iranian-US war began, dropped down to single figures now. Let's look at some of the individual vessels that might be targeted here. This is the Elpis, presumably the kind of tanker the US has in mind. It's sanctioned by the US. It loaded with oil up here on the Iranian coast on March the 31st. Now, we don't know where it's going, but it has been heading east all day, apparently unimpeded. It will be interesting to see if that remains the case. Now, some tankers are making their way through the strait without an obvious link to Iran. This is the New Future. It was in Hamraya in the UAE last week en route to Oman. Now, we don't know how or why it's managed to make this voyage, but this dotted line does tell us something. Its satellite tracking data has been turned off for part of the journey. And just one more to demonstrate the limbo that many vessels have been in for weeks. This is the Trimu 3. It's a liquefied petroleum gas tanker. It was making its way to Iran and has then turned round again with a period of its tracking switched off, and it's on its way back to Oman now. What we do know is that this kind of uncertainty is pushing up oil prices. After optimism in markets last week that the ceasefire might stick, we've now seen prices back up above $100 a barrel. And that is where they are likely to stay, with all the economic pain and uncertainty that brings around the world, until there is the genuine prospect of the free passage of shipping instead of escalating threats from the US and Iran.
Paul Kelso there, where the Prime Minister was on his feet for about 2 hours in the Commons. And as we were hearing, he had this to say about Donald Trump's threat to destroy Iranian civilization.
Could I really be clear with this House? That was wrong. A threat to Iranian civilians in that way is wrong. These are civilians, let's remember, who've suffered immeasurable harm by the regime in Iran for many, many long years. And that's why they're words and phrases that I would never use on behalf of this government, which is guided by our principles and our values throughout all of this.
OK, let's bring our panel in for tonight, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Baroness Sayeeda Warsi, and the former Labour Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Thank you both for being here. John, do you think the Prime Minister, were you in the Commons when the Prime Minister was making that statement? Do you think he got the tone right?
Yes, he did. He did. And I'm really pleased. He's calling Trump out now, which he hadn't done properly before. So I thought it was very effective today. His statement around Trump's statements was exactly spot on. But in addition to that, he raised the issue of Lebanon. And he said, it's his view, Lebanon should be within the ceasefire. We thought it was. And he also said that there needed to be now further action, working with other European leaders to ensure that we bring about the end of conflict. So it was the statement was the right position at the moment. We'll now look then about how we move forward. The one thing he said as well is that he will not be sending military, the British military, the ships in particular, he would not be sending them into the Straits until the conflict was over. I think that's quite significant because that hopefully will prevent us being drawn into any madcap action that Trump undertakes. What I thought was lacking, he did make reference to it, but the reality is Netanyahu started this war. It was him that drew the Americans in. It's him that's bombing Lebanon. It's him that's excluding them from the ceasefire. I think we needed firmer action. I intervened in the statement and said what we need to do now is bring European leaders together. Trump is not going to rein in Netanyahu, so we've got to find others who will. And if he could put on his agenda now, his next statement with his European leaders, the development of a European-wide sanctions regime, that might have some influence. That's where we need to go to the root cause of these problems, which is Netanyahu.
Okay. And Sayeeda, on the response from Keir Starmer, I mean, I suppose, it's words, but actually, does he have any power in this situation on the global stage?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that the Prime Minister called this right from the outset. It was obvious to anybody who's, I spent many years at the Foreign Office, it was anybody who spent time in government that this war was neither necessary nor was the action legal. And it could have been a moment when the Prime Minister just felt that he had to throw in with the US. And he didn't. He took a position that was right for the United Kingdom and he took a principled position. And I think, unfortunately, both Kemi and Nigel Farage took the wrong decision at that time, and I think they've been trying to backtrack since then. Completely, because there was no legal basis for this war as it started. And I think that both Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage were so keen to be seen to be supporting the United States and particularly Trump that they took the wrong decision at a time when they should have been thinking about Britain's national interest. So I think the Prime Minister, this has been one of those moments where the Prime Minister has made the right calls and is using the right language and is making sure that he's putting British interests first.
David Lammy's meeting with JD Vance, should that be happening, do you think?
I think it's important we keep meeting with them, but we need to go in there and be very clear what we're saying. I think we've got to make it absolutely clear to them that we don't support this war. We don't support the continued bombing of Lebanon, and we need them to be exerting influence to bring peace about. Do
you think the government should be more clear that they don't think the blockade should be happening on the Strait of Hormuz?
I think we need to be more specific, definitely, because my view, I think it'll be a fiasco, and it will have repercussions economically for the rest of us across the globe, particularly us as well. The one thing that never came out of today's statement was about the long-term preparations that we need to have potentially for the recession that we're going to face as a result of this war that's taken place. I think we need to be absolutely blunt with Trump and Vance or whoever, because they've gone beyond any political norms we've ever experienced before. When you have someone, the statements that Trump has made are boorish, they're almost unstable. This portrayal of him as Jesus Christ, it's, I was brought up a Catholic. Our Catholic priest...
We're going to come on to this later.
Well, he described our Catholic priest optimistically described me as a lapsed Catholic. You don't have to be a Catholic to be offended by that sort of behaviour. And it's I actually think we're dealing with someone who is so unstable we cannot rely upon the US at the moment. So therefore we have to form other alliances across Europe and the global south.
On the economy, the Resolution Foundation, we now have a bit of a sense of how much ordinary people are going to be paying hundreds of pounds more. is the Chancellor going to have to come back for more in the autumn?
Yeah, she is, but also I think often when these wars take place, Ali, we in the UK have been protected, and there've always been wars over there. And even when we have been actively involved, they haven't had a direct impact on our day-to-day lives. This is one of those wars where it will have a direct impact on people's lives. The cost of living crisis, the cost of food, the cost of fuel. I already know young people who are looking around, shopping around for the pump that is still selling at a slightly lower price. And at a time when people are really on the edge financially, this could be the moment where they're struggling to cope and may not cope. And I think it's therefore absolutely right that the government is continuously focused on the fallout of this war for ordinary citizens in the United Kingdom, and that's how they spend their money and how they live their lives in spending that.
Thank you both. We will come back to you because there's so much to talk about. And lots of activity in the Commons today, as we've been hearing. And Defence Secretary John Healey has been also speaking. He was speaking to the Parliamentary Labour Party, and our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has been outside the meeting. John, I hope you've been keeping a close eye, keeping your ear to the door. What have you heard?
Didn't need to, really, because I had a chat with John Healey when he came out. He faced a lot of questions about the local elections as well as about defence issues. No news from Mr Healey about that spending announcement that Kemi Badenoch challenged the Prime Minister about, the defence investment plan, or how the UK is going to increase its defence spending in light of the wars in Ukraine and now the Middle East. But Mr Healey's was setting out the government's achievements in the past a year and a bit since the general election. And of course, he faced some jittery Labour backbenchers who are very worried about those elections. He told me that, for example, in his patch in Barnsley, it's going to be very tough, he said. So this was the first meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party since MPs have been in their constituencies over the 2-week Easter break, and clearly a lot of them are very concerned about the government's unpopularity, about the challenges they face in those elections on the 7th of May, and of course the war in the Middle East and the blockade of the Straits of Hormuz and all the other problems are creating a cost of living crisis. And of course, all the signs are that voters tend to blame the government when that sort of thing happens. So Mr Healey faced a lot of questions from MPs about the whole government approach. He attempted to be reassuring. He is by nature a calm, steady, safe pair of hands, you might say. He's not flashy, he's not particularly flamboyant, but he was making the point that he and other defence ministers are going to be out and about between now and those local elections, because the government has got a tough job ahead. So a warning from the Defence Secretary to MPs that things are going to be tough over the next few weeks, not least because of the war in Iran. He was very critical of the Iranians. There wasn't as much criticism of President Trump as we heard from the Prime Minister earlier today, when the PM criticised President Trump's language about wiping out the whole of Iran and so on, and his criticisms of the Pope and all that. One of the key things, of course, we heard from in the Prime Minister's statement was the pledge about Lebanon, how it must be included in the ceasefire. Plenty of MPs were raising the plight of Lebanon, and of course there was quite a bit of that at the PLP as well. It's just finished. Like the Prime Minister's statement, went on rather longer than we expected, but it's just finished now, and I think the Defence Secretary is back in the House of Commons chamber, because there's another defence statement about the threat of Russian warships in the North Atlantic and the English Channel. OK, John, thanks so much for bringing us into the House of Commons with you this evening. Thank you. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, Donald Trump risks a schism with Christian voters after criticising the Pope and posting an AI-generated picture of himself striking a messianic pose.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Well, in other Donald Trump-related news, the Pope has pushed back against criticism from the president, saying he will continue to speak out loudly against the war. In a lengthy Truth Social post overnight, Donald Trump called the Pope weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. Well, Pope Leo spoke to journalists about the US president's comments while on board a flight to Algeria.
I basically said that the message of the church, my message, the message of the gospel, blessed are the peacemakers. I do not look at my role as being political or politician. I don't want to get into a debate with him. I don't think that the message of the gospel is meant to be abused in the way that some people are doing. And I will continue to speak out loudly against war, looking to promote peace, promoting dialogue in multilateral relationships among the states, to look for just solutions to problems. Too many people are suffering in the world today. Too many innocent people are being killed. And I think someone has to stand up and say, there's a better way to do this.
Well, the president, seemingly not looking to diffuse any possible offence to Catholics across the world, posted this AI-generated picture on Truth Social of him striking what we'll call a messianic pose. Well, he has since deleted that post, but he doubled down on his criticism of the pontiff in the last hour.
Pope Leo said things that are wrong. We believe strongly in law and order, and he seemed to have a problem with that, so there's nothing to apologize for. He's wrong. And the other thing is he didn't like what we're doing with respect to Iran.
OK, let's bring our US correspondent Mark Stone in, who's at the Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Virginia. Mark Stone, so the president this evening doubling down on his criticism of the Pope.
Yeah, he is indeed. Look, to get the truest opinion, you have to get out of the bubble that is Washington, D.C. And so I'll be honest, we plucked this church off a map, but we headed out to Virginia. This is Trump country. This is where Trump does well and has done well for a number of years now. It's also, like many parts of America, it's very, very religious. And this Catholic church seemed to me to be a relatively good place to begin, just to understand whether people are offended either by his criticism of the Pope or offended by that rather bizarre image that came out overnight. Incidentally, one of numerous messages that he was posting on social media at literally all hours of the night. So we spent the morning here. We joined them for Mass at midday. Well attended, I have to say. It's a huge suburban church, this. In many parts of the UK, this would be seen as a really very large church. Here, it's just another church. But well attended, and after Mass, we caught up with a few of the parishioners.
I voted for him. I like him a lot, but there are times he's kind of going overboard, especially one time when he just recently said that the civilization of Iran would be wiped out.
Yeah.
That really bothered me.
He posted the image of himself as Jesus.
Oh, well, that's a little over the top, I think, but yes.
But he still has your support for now?
Yes. Compared to what are the options?
The ones that vote for him are going to vote for him through thick and thin, no matter what, because aside from this picture, this is the best president we've ever had, bar none.
And Mark, it might be unwise to try to get into Donald Trump's mind, but why do you think he's doing this?
It's a good question. I mean, first of all, the Catholicism is the largest Christian denomination in the United States, so potentially a lot of jeopardy for him there to go out on a limb here, criticise the Pope, and also this image, which, by the way, he now says wasn't he didn't think it was Jesus. He thought he said it was a doctor, perhaps a Red Cross worker, not a messianic image of the type that it certainly looks like. Why the Pope? Well, I wonder. That this Pope's American, remember that. So his voice resonates more in the United States than perhaps other popes. And Donald Trump likes to destroy his opponents. He likes to remove them, either at the ballot box or in other ways, get them out of the way, discredit them. He can't really do that with the Pope because the Pope is above all that. And so I think what he's trying to do, because he hears him and he fears him. I mean, the Pope said at the weekend in St. Peter's Square, abandon every desire for conflict, domination and power. He was talking about the world, but he was also, I think, possibly talking about one man. And that one man was listening, does fear him, and wants somehow to discredit him in any way he can. Because he knows, I think, that this Pope, perhaps more than others in recent history, resonates. His voice resonates across America. But it's a big risk because 55%, Ali, of Catholics voted for Trump in 2024. They are listening to this fight. They're hearing this battle between two very different Americans.
Mark Stone for us live in Virginia. Thanks so much for that. Right, let's bring our panel in, shall we? Seda and John. I mean, just when you think Donald Trump can't get less predictable, is it ever wise for a president to pick a fight with the Pope? John?
We can have disagreements, and there has been in the past, but it's the use of the language and the way in which you go about that discussion and debate. And to be this offensive, I think it does demonstrate two things to me, exactly as your reporter has said. I think Trump is terrified of the Pope. I actually do. And I think he's terrified of a number of particularly religious leaders coming out against his policies and what he's doing. But also, secondly, I genuinely do think he's delusional as well. I think he's unstable, delusional, and we have to take all this into account. I think this will do him more damage than anything else. But anyone parading as Jesus Christ in any society, in any community like that, you would actually think, you'd question their mental health, wouldn't you, in normal circumstances? So we've got to recognise that's what we're dealing with for these few years to come, and that we've got to have a strategy to deal with it. And in some ways, as I said, it's most probably looking at other allies, more stable allies than the US for this period, but also appealing over his head to Americans. And we've all got American friends who are ashamed of this behaviour. And I think we should be providing solidarity with them in their campaigns in the future.
Yeah. Seda, what do you think? I mean, he says this picture, he deleted it, and he says that he was a doctor, not Jesus.
Yeah, which is, more kind of delusional Trump comments. But that image, Ali, is, of course, offensive to people who are Christians, Catholics. John talked about it. But there will be, I'm a Muslim, and there will be Muslims across the world who are appalled at that picture. The status of Jesus within Islam, within so many other kind of societies, is huge. The way in which Iranians, people in the Gulf, people across Pakistan, so many people who've been involved in the current conflict and trying to resolve this current conflict will be looking at those images and will be disgusted and appalled and will be offended by these images of a man like Trump, a man who has a history of all sorts of issues, from financial issues, sexual issues, all sorts of allegations he continues to face as part of the Epstein scandal, would depict himself as such a revered figure, is offensive to people who are much wider than the Christian and the Catholic community. But it also reiterates to us why in this country we have to be so cautious of what was always considered to be this special relationship, when the head of that special relationship, as far as the United States is concerned, is not a person who seems to share either our values, our approach to politics. He's no statesman, and he is now entered a war with no clear aims and no end strategic game, which seems to change almost on a daily basis. And it again kind of reiterates why the Prime Minister was right not to go into this war with him.
Do you think the Pope should be talking about political matters?
The Pope will always talk about matters around peace and war, and that's been throughout. And as I say, you can disagree with the Pope on any view that he takes, but it's the way in which you express that disagreement. Just cast your mind back. Do you think at any time over the last, well, I've been involved in politics 50 years, any time over the last 50 years, we would be sitting down having a discussion about an American president portraying himself as Jesus Christ? Never in my mind would I have even envisaged that sort of thing. It's the offensive nature of Trump's behaviour. It isn't just this, on a whole range of other issues as well. My worry is that, as we saw in the film, really, that actually not enough Americans are waking up to the role that Trump is playing. And I'm amazed that some of that support is clinging on. But I do know large numbers of Americans who just hold their head in despair and think, what do people think of our country anymore? Yep. And it is a special relationship with the American people, not Trump himself. Certainly, he's destroyed that.
Yeah. And we've also got to remember that the Pope isn't just speaking about what's happening in Iran. He is deeply concerned and has said so in relation to what's happening in Lebanon. Some of the most appalling assault in Lebanon has been against the Christian community, as it was, for example, in Gaza. And so as somebody who is the head of the Catholic Church, of course, these are people, this is his flock. He should be completely engaged where he feels that this community is under attack, as he should be for peace more generally. And I think it's appalling the way that Trump has managed to really make this into.
Thank you both. We will come back to you. And the situation in the Middle East is sure to feature heavily on our late night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 o'clock. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be the Daily Mirror columnist Kevin Maguire and the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Baroness Foster. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, as the government confirms it will bring forward a bill which will bring forward closer relationships with Europe, we speak to the former Brexit negotiator, Lord Frost.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The government plans to unveil legislation in the King's Speech, which will mean that the UK follows European Union rules without necessarily giving MPs a vote every time. The Prime Minister has been embracing Brexit divisions. He said this morning that he strongly believes the UK's best interests are in a stronger, closer relationship with Europe, and said the bill will face parliamentary scrutiny. But opposition leaders and former prominent Brexiteers have reacted with fury. Lord Frost was chief Brexit negotiator, and I spoke to him a little earlier today about this. And of course, I also asked him about Donald Trump's latest actions. Lord Frost, thanks so much for talking to us. You are someone who has praised Donald Trump, but recently you've been a bit more critical. What's your view on what you've heard from him recently?
So I think the Trump administration has done a lot of things that I agree with, but more recently they've gone about it in a way that seems to be damaging, their own, what they're trying to achieve. And in particular, they want to see, they said in their national security strategy, a Europe that was made up of nations, political forces that supported traditional Western values and civilization. And yet, Trump has spent his time rubbishing national sovereignty in Europe, Greenland, the kind of rhetorical attack on Canadian sovereignty, all this sort of thing. And it, in a way that undermines what he's trying to achieve. And it's actually producing a bit of a backlash where a lot of Europeans feel, well, where can I go other than to the EU, which is precisely the opposite effect that he hopes to achieve, I guess.
And we'll come on to the EU, but I guess, do you think Keir Starmer should be standing up to him, or what can Keir Starmer do in this situation?
I think Starmer has got it like 3/4 right, probably. I think he didn't handle the Iranian thing quite right. I think we should have been a bit more upfront in using the bases, and maybe this would have forestalled some of these problems. But fundamentally, I believe that countries' leaders should say what they think and argue that out if necessary. I mean, that's what we did with the Europeans in 2020. And obviously, I don't agree with what Starmer says, but I think he's got a perfect right to say it.
And do you think he should therefore be more critical of Donald Trump?
Well, it doesn't need to be in public, because I think it would be very easy as a Labour politician just to get pulled by your backbenchers and the political opinion that just dislikes Donald Trump. He has to stand up for British interests, and sometimes that involves saying and doing things you don't personally like in the wider interests of the country. But I think it's not been so bad so far. I think, the real weaknesses of this government are elsewhere.
When we talk about Donald Trump's unpredictability, what does that mean for the UK? Do you think that therefore we need to tilt towards Europe? That's what a lot of people are saying.
I don't think it makes economic sense for us to tilt towards Europe. I think it's obvious in security and defence, Europeans collectively need to do more to defend themselves. We need to spend more, we need to be more serious about things. That's going to take a long, long time, and only the Americans can deliver certain capabilities for the next couple of decades. The problem with Europe, from our point of view, and that of some of our friends, is that if you try to do things with the EU, it always gets caught up in EU institution building. It's all about, are you sucked into their institutions? Do you have to accept their rules? Do you have to pay in? It all becomes part of that. And I think, the best way of doing security and defence would be in smaller groups with other European countries that are willing to spend properly and do real defence capabilities. Whether that's on offer, I'm not sure, but that's what I would try and do.
Well, we've tried to be close to Europe in some ways on defence, and they haven't let us. But I suppose,
that's right.
They would say that their red lines still remain on the customs union and on the single market. And what we're talking about now is quite a specific, 76 rules for food and drink that the Prime Minister's talking about today.
Yeah, on that side of things, I think this policy is a nonsense, frankly, the food and drink thing. And let's not forget, also binding us into EU rules on carbon taxation, the single electricity market, and who knows what else is going to come down the line.
So you think it's a nonsense because it's sort of setting the stage for total alignment?
It's the worst of both worlds. If we all know Starmer and his supporters want to be part of the EU, that's clear. What they're doing is taking us in without any sort of say in these areas. We're bound by EU law once he's signed off on this deal on food and drink and these other areas. We get no say in that. It then applies in this country, firms, farmers, food companies, whatever, that never export to the EU. Never send their goods anywhere near the EU, maybe send them elsewhere in the world, maybe just trade within the UK. They all have to apply EU rules in which they get no say, and they're designed for others.
I suppose, wouldn't they say that, you use some of those mechanisms to move us out of Europe?
No, I don't think, I would not say that. I think what we did in the trade agreement was set up a perfectly normal, albeit very big and very successful trade agreement. No barriers, no tariffs, no quotas. Gives us the right to set our own laws, just as the EU have the right to set their own laws. And that's kind of the normal way of doing things everywhere around the world. Subordinating yourself to other countries' laws in return, for no say, is very unusual, yet that's what we're signing up to.
Do you think, I guess politically for Keir Starmer, it makes sense for him to have some clear blue water between him and Reform and the Conservatives and to take a more pro-EU approach? And we know, we'll talk about Hungary, but we know what happened in Hungary was partly down to the fact that lots of young people are pro-EU. So, does it make political sense for him? Can you understand why he's sort of chosen to go down that route?
I absolutely can. It makes political sense for him, for sure. Most of his supporters want to do that. Most of the people who are defecting to the Greens, I imagine, want to do that as well. It makes political sense, but it doesn't make it the right thing economically or politically for the country, and that's the problem.
And, when we talk about younger people, do you think that ultimately Brexit will be undone by political imperative and by those demographics that younger people are more pro-EU?
I don't. I think that one of the side effects of leaving the EU is that we've kind of stopped looking at what's going on in the EU and the whole dysfunction, their own problems, their own internal disagreements, the fact that many EU countries are also extremely slow growth. And I think if we ever got to another referendum as to whether to go back in or not, I will be very confident of winning that for leave, because I think the real EU, subordinating yourself to that, is something very different to the kind of fantasy EU that a lot of people still have in their heads.
And what do you think about what we've seen in Hungary? Viktor Orban's out. Do you think we've seen the peak of nationalist anti-EU sentiment?
No, not really. I think, I'm no expert on Hungarian politics, but as far as I can tell, the problem that in Hungary has been high levels of corruption, a slow growth economy, a certain degree of just kind of boredom with the same person that has produced this reaction. And in any other country, Peter Magyar, who won the election, I think would be regarded as quite a right-wing candidate, and has already been saying some quite right-wing things today. These forces, the reaction against the Brussels institution, the forces that want not to dilute the nation state any further, are still very strong in Europe, and they keep popping up, and I don't think they're done yet. And while not endorsing everything that some of these political parties say, I think it is a good counter-reaction to stand up for the traditional nation states of Europe.
Okay, thank you so much, Lord Frost. Thank you.
Pleasure, thank you.
Well, that was Lord Frost, but I just want to bring you the latest from David Lammy, who's posted on X. This is the Deputy Prime Minister. He has posted a picture of himself, as you can see there, with J.D. Vance, the Vice President of America, and it says it was great to catch up with my friend J.D. Vance today in D.C. Following his talks in Pakistan. It's vital that the ceasefire continues and we get shipping flowing freely again through the Strait of Hormuz. We continue to work together towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. So the deputies seem to be getting on all right, but not so sure about the Prime Minister and the President of the US. Right, let's bring our panel back in and let's talk about Europe now, because we've been alluding to it a lot and we heard there from Lord Frost. Saida, what do you think? I mean, given the relationship with Donald Trump, does that change things and mean that we need to move towards Europe? I should say you were a Remainer, but you changed your mind at the last minute.
I was a Brexiteer who voted Remain in the end.
That's it, yeah.
Because I found that what the Brexit campaign was telling us was not true, which has subsequently proven to be not true. I felt that there was no real thought going into the kind of campaign that they were running, because in the end it turned out to be more about putting out statements which were false and subsequently turned out to be false. But I think where the Prime Minister is interesting is that we are now 10 years on from that referendum. And there are people who don't, remember the European experience, but there are others, young people, who feel like they've been cheated out of what many of our generation benefited from. And I think it's absolutely right that we keep this under review. That's not about going back and revisiting the referendum, but it's about looking at the kind of relationship the United Kingdom wants with the European Union. I think there's been a lot of hype about this particular piece of legislation that we're talking about here. There's been a huge amount of primary legislation which has passed through Parliament since the Brexit vote, which has secondary legislation attached to it, which basically means Parliament broadly agrees where we're going with things, and then the detail of it is left to secondary legislation. And much of that secondary legislation, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of secondary legislation, has really passed without a peep in Parliament, particularly in the Commons. I mean, in the Lords, we usually spend a little bit more time scrutinising it. So I think this is probably a little bit of a storm in a teacup about what is happening. They're saying that this secondary legislation is going to pass through and then suddenly we're going to go back to like it used to be in the olden days. There has to be a level of harmonisation between the United Kingdom and the European Union. I work in the food sector. I'm familiar with the amount of paperwork that we fill in and how that paperwork continues to change and how it becomes incredibly difficult to import and export between the United Kingdom and the European Union. I'm involved in a manufacturing business who does that regularly. So I think there has to be a level of harmonisation to ensure that we get the full benefits of trade with the European Union.
And John, you're a Remainer, just full disclosure, two Remainers on panel. We have also heard from Lord Frost.
Well, you did. That's balance, isn't it, I suppose?
That is balance. I mean, is it me, or is Brexit used to seem like a dirty word in the Labour Party, but now Keir Starmer obviously, I think, wants to trumpet that he's talking about closer alliances with the EU. Is that quite calculated, do you think?
I think it is, but it's a more pragmatic approach. Having experienced Brexit, and what we're having is various elements of the different sectors of our economy have identified some of the problems that they're having, and therefore they want those ironed out. And what I see this legislation is doing is looking at that. I think it's wrong, though, to say that Parliament won't have a vote and it's all statutory instruments, delegated legislation. There is another procedure that we use in the Commons, and it's trying to get technical, but it's called the super affirmative. And it's where a statutory instrument is published, there's consultation, and the government then can amend that before it's finally voted upon. So that's a more democratic way of doing it, and in some ways, that will overcome some of the anxieties that people have got. So we have still control within Parliament of the detail of this, but there will be a massive detail because every sector in our economy is coming at the government and saying this is how we could tweak it now to get a better relationship with Europe. And that's not about ceding control or anything like that. It's coming to a democratic decision on a particular statutory instrument. But I think Parliament does need to be more involved. And I think the government will have to bend on that one.
We're going to have to leave it there. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Getting the gang back together. Starmer is joined by Andy Burnham and Angela Rayner for a school visit. We take a look at the PM's relationship with his leadership rivals.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, the damning judgment from Phase 1 of the inquiry into the Southport killings, which finds the attack was foreseeable and avoidable. Also ahead, we'll look at how the Iran war is impacting household finances in the UK and why travellers across Europe are reporting significant delays at airports. There's all that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Middle East correspondent. We've just entered Gaza. The vista out there is complete destruction. I'll always remember going into Gaza City during the war. All around us was destruction and the sounds of battle. I witnessed the scars of the October the 7th attacks, burnt out homes, bullet holes in walls and bloodstains on the floor.
People were murdered, people were kidnapped.
The Israelis insist that many of these prisoners are terrorists, but here the Palestinians consider them a blend of freedom fighters and political prisoners. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Okay, there's a lot of firing going on.
Can you explain to me why? We're journalists, sir.
Let's go. Watch, wait. Right, we're going to get in. Right, get in, get in. Get in.
We just want to ask you a few questions about your involvement with ISIS. Next step for them quite often is getting on a boat and sailing illegally over into Europe.
Es un solo procesamiento, una sola sacada.
Whoa. Whoa. Oh my goodness. Whoa. Oh my goodness. If you weren't affected, you'd be a bit of a strange person.
Turn off the camera. Turn around and go away.
Okay, but
listen, I told you 3 times.
They saw 2 guys, 2 bad people.
There's an absolutely packed dinghy.
But that is what it's like. Sometimes you have to put in an awful lot of hard work. It's worth doing. I suppose it is what we do.
I'm Tom Cheshire, Sky's data and forensics correspondent. We gather, analyse and visualise data to tell data-driven stories.
Well, they say never work with children and animals. Well, what about children and not 1, but 2 contenders for your job? Well, the Prime Minister bravely not only faced youngsters at Holy Trinity School, yes, that is right, Holy Trinity in Ashton, but also football banter, plus chat with former Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner and Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham. The Holy Trinity. Let's have a listen.
You see, Andy? Yeah, it's spreading. When's the last time you want to drag it straight in there? A little while ago.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
All right, no, it was good. We've done the football bit, so
oh,
you're all right.
Okay, yeah, so I'm all right. I can turn up.
We're on to what's your favourite breakfast?
Oh, okay. What is your favourite?
I'll tell you what, the other end, toast is the favourite. What about you? Toast?
Cocoa Pops here. Cocoa Pops for sure.
Yeah, it was straight in there with that.
Even the brown chocolate.
Mine's a donkey, but it's got our butter on.
We're doing the consultation on nutritional standards today.
With tangerine.
With a tangerine on the side.
Tangerine. What's wrong with that?
Well, there they are, the Holy Trinity. John, who's your pick to be the leader of the Labour Party?
I'm staying out of it.
Oh, no.
I love these political events where everyone is really friendly when they're all plotting against one another. Can you remember that picture when Tony Blair bought Gordon Brown an ice cream?
Yeah.
That was it. I thought, here's an ice cream rather than stab me in the back.
Well, they look happy enough, don't they?
Yeah, fair enough.
This is politics, isn't it? And it's the run-up to the local elections and the party's trying to show a level of unity. And I think to some extent, you know, I think both Angela and Andy will probably appreciate the fact that this has happened. Having a public photo like this might be an opportunity to maybe clear some of the bad feeling between them.
Do you think they are clearing some of the bad feeling between them? Come on, give us a little bit of insight.
It's interesting this. I actually don't think individually there's bad feeling between them. They're not the problem. The problem are the courtiers, aren't they? They're always those organising in the background and all the rest of it. He'll be up to all sorts of tricks. But each one of them will have their campaign in place in case what happens in the May elections, there might be a leadership challenge. My own view, I think Keir Starmer will stumble on, but he probably won't be safe for quite a while, and it might well, the challenge will come back later in the year if our circumstances haven't improved.
I mean, I think there's going to be disastrous results for the Labour Party at the local elections. I think there'll be disastrous results for us, actually, the Conservatives at the local elections. I think the winners probably are likely to be people like Independents and maybe Reform and the Lib Dems.
The Greens.
I think that's where Greens...
Exactly. But on these three, John, do you think we need... Oh, they've gone. But do you think we need all three in the Labour Party? You know, do you think they need to work as a team and we should see them all on the front bench?
The Labour Party always has been we call it a broad church because it's a broad coalition of all different interests, etc. So you'll always have this melee going on, and the way you prove yourself to be a good Prime Minister is how you manage that. I think there's other voices as well, certainly from the left, that are not included at the moment in that. And if you look, Keir Starmer always says, who do you admire? He always admired Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson used to have a cabinet that was a big figures, rumbustious, but he held it together. As a result of that, got better decision-making.
And would you like Burnham in Parliament?
I think Andy shouldn't have been blocked. I think that was a huge mistake because we would have won that by-election, and giving it over in the way that we did, I think, was a tactical mistake, and I think it did count against Keir's judgment as well.
And in a word, of those three, who would you pick from the Holy Trinity?
I'm not a Labour
Who would
Party
you not
member.
want to face?
I don't have a vote in this.
Sorry, not in the Labour Party. Who would you not want to face as a Tory?
You know, I think all three of them have got some really interesting characteristics. But I'm a northerner, so I think both Rayner and Burnham would make great Prime Ministers.
You're not a Tory anymore, are you? Anyway,
I'm still a Conservative.
Anyway, we're going to have to finish this off there, I'm afraid. Thank you both, Zainab Arsi and John McDonnell. That is it for us tonight. We will be back tomorrow at 7. Up next, the UK Tonight with Sam Washington. Thanks so much for watching.